I will talk about. Actually, the first little point up there is the longest one, so we'll probably do that before coffee break. And then we'll have a few little other things. Usually I won't be able to go through all of sort of miscellaneous things about rules and regulations. We will work a little bit with the individual study plan this afternoon, though, after coffee. And then I'll try to round off a little bit with what I call research cultures, which I think is nice just to see that we are different for many good reasons. Now, all through this, I think this should be as interactive as possible. So, interrupt me whenever, and we'll just bring up a discussion whenever it comes around. I will be probably a little bit provocative in places, but that's intentional. Okay? So you know that. All right. Well, to do this, I didn't present myself last time, but I will present myself this time, because when I speak about my own personal reflections, it's got to do with me and my history. So I'll briefly tell you who I am, and don't have a look at the details. But you can see one thing from here is that I've been here a very, very long time. More than half of my life. Actually too long. I'm really a product of this university. So I've been doing my career. I've been out a little bit, if you like, but basically going from a PhD student and then, the usual wheel, if you like. I used to be director of graduate studies until April this year, but now I'm not, because I got this other sort of little thing, which means another kind of paperwork or administration. And this is sort of a little bit of my track record. I've had a few PhDs, and actually the first number would be, the ones that I've, if you like, bred, from the beginning all the way to the end. So, but if you count some that I've been involved in more or less, the number is a little bit higher. At the moment, I have 5 PhD students. I'm trying to cut that down, actually, and give some of them to my colleagues, because 5 is a little bit too much for me. I can't handle 5. 3 is my optimum number. And also, I think this is also important, and we will get back to this, is that we do tend to forget that we have a life somewhere else. It's very easy for people in a place like this to be available all the time, and work is our life. But most of you, I'm sure, have a life, on the side. And particularly when you're in the career move, moving up, you sort of have another career as well at home. Raising children, for example, building a home. And that's pretty important to remember. Okay, so what I'll do, or when I did this at least, I sat down and thought, what did my journey look like? So I'm going to go back from the point when I was sort of right out of school, if you like, just got my PhD. And I think, and I may be wrong, yes.
I didn't get where you got the PhD.
Here. Everything was here. I've been here too long. I think that the first time you do something, the only thing you can compare with is sort of your own history. That's what I think. Sorry, I should stay here. Here? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Being directed. And I think most of us would do that you would go back and think, how was I supervised myself? What did my story look like? And because that's how I sort of base my own knowledge, if you like. And I think I did that too. And I think we have all different journeys, right, from getting a PhD. I'm sure we all do. And that depends on our supervisor and the environment that we're in. And when I look back, this is what I sort of found out. I had a supervisor that I didn't see very much. Actually, not very much at all, to be honest. We had no daily or even weekly meetings, and it was really a very large distance. Very large distance. So when I think back, I actually was supervised more by my senior PhD students. They helped me a lot. I mean, it took me probably a year to figure out that you were supposed to write scientific papers. And that was a PhD student who told me. All right, so that's why we're here. Brilliant. And also, I think you learned a lot from, the traditions that you have in the environment that you are, that things that are not written down, but they're sort of in the walls. This is the way we do it, because we've always done it this way, and you learn by tradition. And that's what you bring along. And then I'm sure you can, reflect on that in your own little story. What do you bring along with that when you're on, if you like, on the other side of the fence? And my reaction was, this is not the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it differently. I didn't like my journey in that respect. But on the other hand, not being supervised very much it's not all bad actually, because to me at least it taught me self-reliance. When I had written my thesis, it was mine. It was mine alone. My supervisor didn't actually add anything to it, or very small things. So it was mine, which is a good thing. And then I thought about this, because this was sort of the way it worked, that in the environment that you are, you sort of tend to conserve traditions and history, because this is the way we do it. It always worked, and we just keep on doing it. So how do you change that? Some of it's actually for good, and some of it's actually for bad. And then you're going to have to go back to your own environment and think about this. All right, well, I'm moving on sort of on a timeline here, if you like. So I got my first PhD students sometime around 93. I did my postdoc and I was away, and I came back and some research money came in. And that was sort of an interesting thing to me, because the PhD students I got, I mean, the age difference wasn't very large. I was still relatively young, to be honest. And so students just coming out of engineering school, I mean, there were only a few years between us. So we were sort of, in that respect, fairly equal on an age thing. And to me, what happened with that, this was completely unintentional. You would see that most of the stuff I've been doing has been unintentional. What happened was that, I became much more of a friend than a boss. So I wasn't really the supervisor, I was the friend. And since I'd taken on the role that I was not going to do it the same way my own supervisor did, I obviously overreacted the other way. Which meant that I was worried about everything. Everything. And felt responsible for everything. And I had really bad habits. I could call up my PhD students on a Sunday evening saying, tomorrow morning, I've got this idea, tomorrow morning, we're going to have to do this. Which is really bad habits, actually. Over-enthusiastic, wanting too much. And the last bullet here, I just wrote low-risk projects. I'm not sure if this is generic or not. Maybe it is. That the projects that I was running with my first PhD students were, if you like, low risk for me. I knew that if they didn't perform, I could do the work. I was confident about that. Really. It was stuff that I knew about. I could do it. So to me, that was low risk. Yes?
Regarding the third bullet, the relationship between you and your student is kind of more like friends than boss.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about
I'll come back to that because it's sort of a little bit of a theme here as well. So it's about relationships. Okay, I'll go on in time.
That's low risk for your student, right? Because if you do their work, they don't have a thesis.
Yeah, but I didn't see it that way. It was low risk for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you say it's good if you can tell your student that you're his backup person?
Sure.
Like you can do the job if he fails.
Yeah. Well,
So this is
I guess
like
that.
optimal.
I'll get back to that too.
Well, it's an education discipline, so you have to raise persons. They are still in that pupil
Yeah.
relationship, so they will never be a good scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that situation where the student fails, I think the student should fail.
Oh.
So there should not be a PhD at the end of the failed
Well.
PhD process.
No,
The
but
advisor
what
should
I
take
want
over.
to motivate you to take the risk, so if they can,
Okay,
if
yeah,
they
yeah.
can say, look, I can back you up if you.
Yeah, but that's
But
sort of
if you frighten him, you fail, you don't get PhD, then it will go very low risk.
Yeah.
right?
You know,
Yeah, but
truly, this is not something I talked with my students about. You know, I was just feeling good for me.
yeah.
So that's a different thing. After a while, you know, I had a few students, and then the next little thing comes, which is probably quite obvious, that you really find out that no two students are the same. They're all different, right? Because it's people. They're all people, and they have different needs and different ways of working. And I wrote some of them up here. I'm sure you can recognize some of these bullets here. Some want to have help all the time, and some really doesn't want to have any help. Some want to have a lot of structure, and some just prefer ad hoc, whenever, on time discussions. Some of them would seek help when they need to, and some would just sit there and wait for you or me as a supervisor to come and sort of serve them. You know, here you are. And there are some who come here and they say, I want to become the expert. I want to evolve into the expert. And some would expect me as a supervisor to know everything up front, to already be the expert. And I'm sure you know that some people are very focused, they just go about and they just do it, and some, you know, they go this way and that way, and, you know, never find the trail really. So you're going to have to support them, you know, to stay within the box. I still think, however, at this time at least, I probably supervised all my students the same way. Because I didn't think about this too much at the time, to be honest. Another thing which I wrote up here, and that sort of became obvious to me probably at that time, is that how do you distinguish between project goals and thesis goals? I guess most of you are in the same situation as I am. You apply for research funding from somebody and they have constraints. You have to deliver, right? And then the student has to deliver a thesis. And it's not necessarily the same thing. And really you're going to have to figure out what is what in this respect, because it's easy to get lost. And I had a scaring example somewhere around here, that time, where I took over a PhD student from someone else. And they had a European project that they had been working on for 3 years. And they decided, you know, we're going to have to do the work and deliver everything to the project. We're going to do that first in 3 years, because that was the project duration. And after that, you know, we'll try and write some papers on it on the 4th year. And that's pretty naive. And of course it didn't work. It just doesn't work. Which was very, very sad. Because after 3 years, this poor student, who was actually very good, he was sitting there and he had done less than half his coursework and he had no publications. So if you look at, you know, what he'd done towards his thesis, it was like 20%. after 3 years. It didn't look very good, right? So that's what can happen if you miss that. So you're going to have to marry these two somehow early to make sure that the student gets what the student wants and the project gets what the project wants. Yes?
I have a question. It says Dussel 1996, associate professor. Isn't that the same, or is it a translation of
No, this is an old version. Associate professor at the time was a Swedish version called biträdande professor, which was actually above. Yeah. But we had a different promotion system at the time. Yeah. And, you know, to be honest, I was still worried about everything. And the more students you have, the more worries you get, and the less sleep you get too. So, which is a bad spiral to be in, to be honest. After some time, this just became too much for me. And I had to sit down and think, you know, how am I going to figure out a way to be less worried and to sleep better? And what I tried to do then was to develop what I wrote here, which is, you know, not very clear, but how do you find a healthy boss-friend relationship? Because you're going to have to be, in some way, both. And this was a little bit against my nature, because I'm the kind of person who likes to be friends. And I had to sort of take a step back and say, well, no, I'm going to have to be more boss. It sounds rough, doesn't it? Very rough. But if I could do that, I would sleep better, and the communication I had with my PhD students actually improved, because there was less prestige involved. But you have to find that limit that you can live with. So to me, that was a key, actually. And also after a while, I sort of tried to figure out a way to supervise different students differently. And nowadays, I usually have a dialogue with my students, sort of, who am I? I tell them who I am, which is bullet number 3. I'm very unstructured. I hate Monday morning meetings. I don't like them. I want to talk to my students when there's something coming up which is of interest. I love ad hoc discussions. And that works really well when I have a student who is the same. But I have students who are very structured, and then there is a clash, and you have to sit down and talk about it. I had one Swiss PhD student, I'm not sure because he was Swiss, but he was extremely structured. And it didn't work at all between us for 2 years, until we found sort of a way in between where we could both live. And after that, it worked really, really well. That means, in a way, sort of adapt a little bit. I have to adapt to my students. But remember, I think this is another key message. I can't sell my soul. I am still who I am, and I am one of the parts here. So even the students will going to have to adapt somehow. Because if I change who I am, I can't work well. So don't sell your souls. Negotiate something which is in between that suits you both. I think that's very important. And then there are a few other little bullets here that sort of, I think, comes with experience, if you like. You get better at formulating project goals versus student aims, and that would be thesis goals in this case. So that you can start up a project and you find ways where you can do thesis work in parallel to project work, and it actually marries together, and you can package it so there's no contradiction involved. Less prestigious maybe comes with age. Then something else happened to me. I wrote willing to take risks. I had this low risk projects on the first one, right? And I'm not sure what happened, but to me at least, I found it a lot more intriguing to take risks. which of course is a risk for me, but maybe an even greater risk for my students. So there's another little anecdote about another student I had. We got this project that wasn't really very well defined, and we had kind of a large freedom to do whatever we want to. And I had some thoughts in my head that maybe we can do this and this and that, but I had no idea how to do it. So I sat down with my student and I say, I've got these loose ideas and I have no idea how to do it. But if you're willing to take this position, maybe we can do it together. And he was, of course, a little bit scared. You know, I have a supervisor. You sit down with the first day, and the supervisor says, I have no idea how to do this. But it worked really well, because none of us could do it, but together we can actually evolve. And that means that, in this case, I grow as much as my student, because we have to do it together. But it's a lot scarier. Trust me. Then there's another one. How much of a student's thesis can I write? This is a problem I encountered sort of around that time. So I'm throwing that question at you. How much of the thesis can you write? Yeah. None. Okay. Any other options?
What do you mean by right?
Well,
Sitting in front of a computer writing or helping with a case?
well,
Can I
it's open. Yeah.
Can I explain my view?
Yeah.
I did my PhD in media communication and also was in game studies where people write a lot together and they also don't write monographs that I had to do. I
Okay.
had to write every single word myself, and the only thing my supervisor did was correct my English
Okay.
a bit more.
Sure.
So I was not allowed to write a lot.
Yeah.
I could do it, but I
Fair.
couldn't include any text that anybody else had written.
Okay, so there we are on one side, when the thesis itself is the written text.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Yes?
I like the way of trying to write maybe something that a student has written and then you rewrite part of it as an example, the type of thing you're trying to achieve.
That's teaching them how to write, which I guess is okay.
Material in
Yeah.
certain parts.
Yeah. Okay, but where is the limit? Yeah.
Maybe one of the issues here relates to publications. So very
One of
often
them-
at the end, we may not want to write the thesis for our students, but if that thesis is composed piecewise by publications along the way, very often we don't want to put our names on the publication that isn't very well written. So the students can actually have the supervisor and collaborators write some of their thesis
Sure.
piecewise. That's quite a difficult issue, I think.
Yeah, well, but it's still, the question is very open, right? Yeah, that can happen too. Okay.
But
Yeah.
like in my case, it was the rules and regulations, so we couldn't go around it.
Okay.
So that could also be an answer. What
Yeah.
is the tradition in that?
Sure. Okay, I'll tell you my story. I had a brilliant PhD student. He was really, really good, except for one little detail. You know, he just couldn't write. And it had nothing to do with his English. He just wasn't very good at formulating himself. And I've been struggling with him, like you said, you know, you work with the student for years. And this was at the end of the PhD, and I was like, you know, I want him to finish. So, you know, he had his last paper. Everything was done. And I couldn't bear this iterative process again. So I said, you know, give me the stuff. I'll write the paper. So I wrote the paper, which of course went into his thesis. And then I thought, is this okay? Is this okay? Where is the moral limit? Where is it? Where is the moral limit?
But isn't writing and art would be more than
Yeah, it is. It's one of the goals, isn't it? That a PhD should be able to communicate in orally and in writing and that sort of thing. Sure, it is. Yeah.
Can I ask, when you said that this student was brilliant, could you give some examples of the brilliance, because it wasn't writing stuff?
He was very good at everything else. So if okay, this is technical stuff. So what he was doing is, in his last paper, he conceived the idea. He formulated the problem. He derived the theory behind it. He developed the experiments, which he did. He did everything in the paper, everything. But he didn't write it, I wrote it.
Couldn't he be the second author of that paper?
Why? He did all the work.
But he was the single author.
No, I wrote the paper, so I was in there too.
But he has particular problem writing like dyslexia.
No. He was just not very good at formulating himself. So it would take forever to fix it up. Yeah,
That was the full thesis, or was it?
one of the papers. So it wasn't the full thesis.
So your field is it typical to just take the paper as it's published and
Yeah,
paste
yeah,
that into
yeah,
the
yeah,
thesis?
it is. Yeah.
Because otherwise I would say for a paper that's perfectly fine.
Sure,
but
but it's part of the thesis, so that's why the question is there. Yeah.
Well, he was a brilliant researcher.
Yeah.
What is he doing now?
Oh, he's doing very well. He's not in academia. He's in industry.
Yeah.
Ah, sure. Yeah. So if I turn it around and I say, I'd be more worried in my case if it was the opposite. I conceived the idea, I derived the theory, I did the experiments, and he wrote the paper. Because in our subject, the written word is not the main thing. Right? So I guess it depends on where you are here in this map. Yeah?
If I were you, I would be extremely concerned because this is going to be, it was his last piece of work in his thesis, and if we couldn't formulate well to communicate with others, how could you expect that he could pass all the exam?
Oh, I mean, because technically he was very good. No problem. No problem at all. Yeah.
It really depends on the importance that you put on the ability to communicate.
Yeah.
And that goes for written and verbal communication.
Yes.
So if it is an intricate part of a PhD to have that ability, that should not be a PhD. He went into industry and he may not rely as much on his ability to write his work. But if the goal is for this person to go into academia, then there needs to be more negotiation.
Could be. Yeah.
That's what I would say.
I mean, we have goals for, becoming a PhD, but how well do you have to fulfill all of them? What is enough? I guess that depends on where you are and what your subject is. That's one thing. The other thing is that I think most of you are going to end up one way or the other. That maybe it's not writing, but how much can you help, with the last paper? There's a moral dilemma somewhere, and eventually you're going to have to ask yourself that question. Where is the limit that I can live with?
So what about the opposite example then? That you say, here's the limit, and that person doesn't fix?
Well, sure, that happens too. And then it's just my limit. I say, I won't go past this. But on the other hand, first you're going to have to think that thought through. Where's my limit? Where is my limit? Yes?
Has it ever happened in your department you just fail a student and still tries?
So they fail.
You fail a student and say, you can't do this is not good enough, you won't get your PhD. I've never heard about something in KPA.
Yeah, we're very poor at this, but yeah, we surely do fail students on coursework.
In coursework, yeah,
Sure.
but when it comes to writing dissertation,
Yeah.
unless the sheet grade,
Yeah.
I don't think you can remember what failed. Or,
No.
from the Roman School, yeah.
Yeah.
Not being failed. So this
Well, it's pretty hard to do that. at least where I am, because we write papers along the way. So it's more a question about how long does it take to finish the paper. Because I mean, anybody can finish a paper if you just get enough time.
But I mean, we had discussion in this course in the spring, and the principal's office said about the student, if you accept into the program, you need to have it was hard. You need to have it pass. It's your responsibility as an advisor to make sure he gets it through.
I don't think that's true, but that's somehow maybe how we conceive it. Yeah. No, it's the student who has to pass, not me.
But once you accept a student, the main supervisor or and the department have the commitment to that student.
Not to pass.
What happens if he or she?
Well, we might get back to that this afternoon. But it's not so easy, I agree on that one. And Sweden is not the place where you do that kind of thing. Yeah, you know about that already. Okay.
And I'm curious if when I was working in Denmark, there are a lot of strange financial incentives
Yeah.
to pass students as well.
Yeah.
And the university doesn't get. And I guess the higher up in the administration you get of running these types of programs, the more you recognize the need to bring the money in
Yeah.
by passing the student.
Sure.
It was a little bit of a shocker, obviously, the first time.
But we have the same. We have the same here. A lot of pressure to graduate more PhDs, and you actually get money afterwards, right? I'm not sure that's morally so good. Okay, concerned but less worried. Something is improving. All right, so, well, this would sort of be now, I think. And this is a hot topic again. More selective when recruiting. I always get the question, how do you recruit to find the right students? Well, I don't know how to recruit, to be honest. I don't think anybody of us knows how to recruit, because we can still make mistakes. But I think what happened to me, at least, was that I started thinking a little bit differently, and I still think a little bit more differently. And I look for different things when I look for PhD students. It's very easy to just have a look at the grades, right? Say, oh, this is a brilliant academic. But I mean, you're going to have to start looking at things like enthusiasm and creativity, and if they're self-supportive. Could be in cases. It could also be in cases that the project you have requires a certain kind of a person. Somebody who's really theoretical, or somebody who's very good at doing experiments, or whatever it could be. So you're going to have to start evaluating those issues as well. I don't say I know how to do it, because that's very difficult. But at least be more open-minded in that respect. Think first, what kind of abilities am I looking for in terms of abilities, rather than just grades. And then I wrote this, try to adapt more and faster. I sort of alluded to that I do try very early nowadays to, even during the first weeks, to actually sit down with the student and tell them who I am. This is me. This is the way I work. And I can adapt, but not too far. I can adapt a bit. And if you don't like it, you're going to have to try to adapt too. Otherwise, this won't work. So try to not only get to know the student, but make sure that the student knows who you are. It actually helps a lot. I'm going to skip that one. Maintain a healthy level of concern. To me, it's very important to still be concerned. And I still want to sleep well, but I don't like it when I'm not concerned, because it keeps me on my toes. Because there's a fair level of enthusiasm and engagement goes into this process. And for me, at least, it's quite important to keep that up. Be interested, enthusiastic. I know it's not so easy to be that for 4 or 5 years, but I tried to at least. And then open-minded about how much I help. This is very difficult. If you have a student that doesn't want any help, you may have to go in there and probe anyway once in a while to check that they are actually on the right track, because it's easy to get lost. I've had students that, they say everything is fine, and they say that for 4 months, and after 4 months you probe, and everything is not fine. And then you lost 4 months and created a lot of frustration. So probing is pretty good. And also, on the opposite, if somebody wants a lot of help, I feel fine saying no. No, this is your job. You're going to create your own knowledge. This is the book. Read the book. It's in there. And also this thing about low-risk projects, or high-risk projects. I mean, what you do when you do that is that you actually allow your PhD student to become better than you are, which is also a little bit scary. So you're sort of on the tail, trying to keep up. And that means that after 3 or 4 years, it's almost the opposite relationship. The student is actually driving you, and you just have to keep up with it. Which is very nice when it works, but it's also a bit scary. And that also means, of course, and this is another thing, is that when that student graduates and leaves, you lose a lot of competence. Because only parts of it will be in me. Not all of it. Only parts of it will be in me. Yes?
Isn't that rather risky? I mean, I've talked to several PhD students whose advisors have taken that approach, and they feel very, very lost. Because they might be better than their advisor, but not at like really, really high levels there. I feel that they don't really get help to develop as far as they could. They
Yeah.
have an advisor, but not good enough within their area to actually be competitive on the work market.
Oh,
The advisor might not even know that because he doesn't know himself.
okay. Well, I guess it depends on what kind of research you're doing. I mean, to me, this would be research that are into fairly new areas where there's not much going on and there's not a lot of literature on it. So you're into the little white areas on the map where nobody knows a lot. And then this is what happens. Yeah, arrogance leads to mistakes. That's really me. When I feel that sometimes I do get arrogant or sloppy, if you like, that I have this feeling that this student is doing so well, I don't have to do anything. It's the perfect situation. That's when things starts happening. So again, probe. Okay, so today, well, I have 4 fairly new PhD students and 1 who is almost finished. So that's my current situation. And that means a lot of work right now. The new ones take a lot of time, and when they're just about to finish, they take equal amounts of time. I would have thought, doing this this is, I don't know, my 5th or 6th generation, or at least my 5th generation of PhD students, that I would eventually develop the feeling that, well, I know how to do this, that sort of thing. Been there, done that. But I never got to that. So there's no feeling of, I know how this works by now. For me, I haven't come there yet. I hope it doesn't come, to be honest. It's still a challenge. I think it's a great challenge. Every time I enroll a new student, I'm not sure what's going to happen, which is scary and kind of interesting. On the other hand, it's more fun than before because I'm less worried, and I know that, well, let this evolve and see what happens. Enjoy the ride, sort of thing. That's a good feeling. I think that maybe comes with experience too. I'm not sure. Okay, now I have some provocative stuff. So some years ago, I started to thinking about myself. Who am I in terms of my work? And I was very binary when I started thinking about this. So as a scientist, I divided the world in two. The traditionalist works in a mature field, fine-tuning, narrow and deep. I mean, you know where you are, you're digging a hole, and then you keep digging. You're going to find something more down there. Established fields, if you like. And then the innovator, sort of where you get out of that hole and you have a look and see, oh, over there nobody's been digging, so maybe that's a nice place to be. Break new things, do more innovative kind of research. And I think, to me, I'm sort of evolved a little bit from this to more that, but I still do both and jump in between, because they give me different sort of feelings about things. And I also think that we as supervisors, or even me, or you see the extremes more often maybe, that you've got a sort of a similar thing. It's not really similar to this, that there are supervisors who use PhD students to do their work. I have this problem. I like this one. You do it for me. Or you have the kind of supervisor that says to the student, there are two of us. We're not sure where this is going. Let's work together. Which is much more collaborative. And you're much more depending on the PhD student and his or her creativity. You're not alone here. And I tend to do a little bit of both. I started more here, and I'm sort of more here now, I think. The world is not binary, but we're moving in gray zones. And to me, it's good to sort of think about this. Who am I when I map myself? And I already told you I have a number of children. Well, they're not so small anymore, unfortunately. And then I started to thinking about, what's the difference about being a parent and a supervisor? And, there are a lot of things in common. It is a long-term undertaking. I mean, children you have at home for at least 20 years. Around 20 years. As PhD student, you have for 4 or 5, or in the worst case, even more. But you still have them around. And sometimes I've been thinking, going from work to home and back again, that maybe I'm supervising my children and raising my PhD students. Sometimes I'm not so sure. And another thing which I think is really, really important here is that in terms of children, you actually transfer your ethics. But you do that to PhD students too. You transfer your professional ethics, which is quite a big responsibility. If you cheat, your students will cheat. It's as simple as that. And there's a lot of other sort of emotional things involved. I think there are a lot of emotional things involved. There's some sort of a loving concern going on, even towards your students, or at least I feel that. And there's a lot of pride involved. I am proud. When I have a new PhD student and they publish their first paper, that's a big thing. It's a big thing. I feel great. It's also a lot of responsibility. And sometimes I can also see that my students involve, since I transfer my ethics and my way of working and some of my way of thinking. I mean, that's the supervisor's role. I sort of create something of an image, not completely, but in parts. In parts. Hopefully the good parts of me, not the bad ones. So I think there are a lot of similarities. And then I have a couple of slides here which I call personal advice. And you'll see that all the personal advice ends with a question mark. So it's again, gray zone things. Do you think that it's difficult to supervise PhD students? Actually, one student here told me that I shouldn't use the word difficult, I should use the word challenging. So let's use challenging. Is it challenging? Do you think so? We talked on the last theme about rules and regulations. Will they help you? Or is it just tying your hands behind your back? Yeah.
I think a little bit of structure and regulations needed. There should be not too much of it.
That's true. There's always some rules you don't like. But I mean, you're right. In some way, there's also comfort, because it says to here and no longer. I mean, these are the boundaries of what I can accept or do, or So in some sense, see them as a help. They can be, actually. I use them once in a while. Say, sorry, I can't do this because it's not okay. Do you think it's going to become easier with time and experience? What do you think? Yeah?
In some sense it must be, because you can recognize different situations and you know how you have solved it. In another way, you always have an employee in front of you. And you also change yourself.
You change yourself, and you're probably right that, with the experience, maybe you get a little bit calmer, not too upset about things. But on the other hand, there are always things happening that you haven't seen before. I can guarantee that. Do you think you will ever have any problems? Yeah? You will all have problems, one way or the other, hopefully small ones. And as with everything else, the earlier you catch problems, the easier they are to solve. But it's sometimes very hard to catch problems because you don't see them. All right, here's some more stuff.
Yeah, you could ask for a future presentation who here thinks they were a problem.
Yeah. Could do. One thing I didn't recognize at first, and that's probably also generic because you stay within your research group or within your area, is that it's hard to realize that there is a culture in there. And it, as I said in the beginning, it's not written down. It just exists. And an advice to you would be to sometimes when you sit there, think about what this culture is. What is it? How can I move around this? The culture that we have in our groups. And you will see it quite clearly that maybe you go to another research group and you'll find that, this is completely different. There are also, within these cultures, a lot of standards. And then never written down, and you may get pressure from colleagues on standards. Again, no, this is the way we do it. We don't write a thesis that way, or we don't publish in those journals. And if you want to break that culture, you're going to get criticism. I'm sure. So if you know what the culture looks like, it's maybe easy to navigate through that. Because otherwise, if you break standards, you will get pressurized from colleagues. Okay, then I wrote, apply the same criteria to all the students within the group. How, and is that possible? So I'll give you an example of what can happen when you have a few PhD students. And the funny thing is that they're just like children. Or could be. I shouldn't generalize too much. They could be. But I've had questions from students saying, why are you sending me to this conference in Copenhagen? My colleague went to a conference in Hawaii. That's the kind of stuff that you can hear. Why do I have to take this course? He didn't have to. It's easy, they talk, right? They talk. And then you're going to have to defend yourself in one way or the other. So that can happen too. Because they have different needs, right? They have different needs. Which sort of leads you to, well, somewhere in your head you need to figure out, what do I prioritize in terms of abilities? When I let my student go up there and defend the thesis, what sort of criteria or abilities I think should be there before I let them do that? So there can be various things, not necessarily just knowledge or writing a certain number of papers, but a lot of other things. Have they been lecturing, or have they actually ever been to a big conference and talked in front of a lot of people? Maybe that's something you want them to have experience of before they leave. Could be many little things. And then you're going to have to work on how that is reached. And if you talk to your students about that, you can also explain what the expectations are. I expect you to be able to do this. And then, of course, what requires extra attention, which is maybe not so easy to figure out the first 6 months or the first year. Somebody may need to do more exercises and training in writing. Okay, then you can fix that. Send them to a course, which the other student doesn't have to go to because he or she can already write. All right. The next one. Do I have to like the student? Yeah, it helps. Yeah? Probably. But do you?
Can you even choose?
Sorry?
Can you make that choice? And you like them or don't?
Yeah, well,
To
that's...
some extent at least, maybe don't like them.
Yeah.
I think in the opposite case, it's often that the student likes the supervisor, otherwise it wouldn't work with him.
Could be. Could be. Yeah.
Isn't that a little bit if you have like personal interviews these things?
Yeah. Well, it's fairly hard in a 2-hour interview to figure out whether you like that person or not.
Yeah,
But
you have like a general.
and students change and I change.
I think the opposite could be rather important, because I think it has been shown that you learn more from a person that you like.
Okay. I haven't heard that, but that's probably true. You let your guard down. Yeah.
I heard that. I couldn't refer to it actually, but I think I get the sources of it.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, how can we guarantee that, and how can we recruit people that we like all the time? But I'm sure it helps.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
while it may be hard to determine if you're going to like this person for 4 years after 2 hours,
Yeah.
if you are able to determine that after 2 hours you don't like them, that's also good information.
Yeah, probably. And then you,
It'd be easier.
yeah, then you won't select that student.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure. I think we act that way as humans.
Yeah.
When it comes to like rules and regulations, you want to hire someone, can you use that as a criteria? I didn't like it. I had best grades, but
I don't think you can write that, to be honest. Or what do you say, Khalid?
Well, like and dislike, I would like to hear on what ground, on scientific ground, is
Yeah.
it skills and abilities, or is it private grounds?
Yeah.
Like talking about chemistry between you or something like
Yeah.
that. The guy doesn't take showers every day or something
Yeah,
like that.
but that's hard to pinpoint, isn't it?
Yeah.
The emotional thing.
Yeah, so you have to,
Hmm.
and we are suspected to work professionally.
Exactly.
If we are musicians or actors or whatever, then we, doctors,
Yeah.
we can say we don't like the patient, we just do it.
Yeah. But it's a little bit different here, though, Khalid,
Yeah.
because the relationship is much tighter and it goes on for a very long time.
Isn't the key to have respect?
Could be. I have many hands.
I think, I mean, this other side of maybe somebody has some rough edges or is being offensive in some way. I find the hardest thing when a student or somebody in a supervisee role gets a lot from you and might almost, and they have to get ownership of it, but then they might reject you or criticize you in relation to what they've almost taken.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of my biggest dilemmas. of
Okay.
Sort of using the tools you gave them to beat you over the head or something like that.
Okay.
And that's a harder one. But
Yeah.
yeah, I can get a resentment
Yeah.
from such things.
Since the relationship is one of unidirectional dependency, I would
Yeah.
assume that most PhD students are pretty likable from the perspective of the advisor. So again, I'd like to turn it around. This must be a bigger problem for PhD students. What if you don't like your supervisor?
Yeah. I'll take one more here.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that going back to the question, what does it mean to like, and at what level should you be looking at? There's a few pointers that can be very helpful. If some arrogance, for example, is passing through this initial conversation, I mean, there's a few things that you can pick up on. And of course, it's not a science. It's more about how you feel interacting with this person.
I have a feeling that most of the most common reason for problems and people changing supervisors actually is emotional. People don't like each other. They can't communicate because the personal chemistry doesn't work, which is strange, isn't it? But I think so. At least the cases I have seen, the communication collapses. There's more advice. Sorry about this. Recruit with care. Well, it means don't take it lightly. Whatever you do in recruitment that's to me as well. I don't know how to recruit well, but I think it's worthwhile to actually spend some time. If you do spend some time, you probably make a wiser choice, and you're going to live with this person for, a number of years. So spend the time and the effort early. Yes.
There is at least a paper for next time talking about recruitment. So
Good.
something to start with.
Yeah.
So I have a question. If the feelings are important, like you, which I agree with, that you say the most common. Why are we so 100% focused on formality when we hire faculty? I mean, you don't even meet someone until they're there.
Yeah. That's true. I don't know. It's probably because we're a public authority and we have lots of rules to follow and objectivity and that sort of thing. You're right. Yeah.
We are very much into that it should be transparent and to have to motivate everything by science, every decision.
Yeah.
But as a matter of fact, I'm working on something that I call divided into three parts: the head, the body, and the other.
The other.
That's
Okay.
all the three are there. So you have to tackle them and to have to be aware of them and to tell them easy. So I'm trying to influence how people think.
Maybe we're just not very good at evaluating chemistry between people.
We don't even take it into account.
No, we don't. I agree. Yeah.
Just very quickly, it's very hard to justify
Yes.
a value of chemistry.
It is. No, you
How do you
can't.
justify it
No,
in
you
a
can't.
report?
No, you can't. I repeat this, make clear who you are. Don't sell your soul. Rather, stay who you are. You're going to work with this with many students. You're going to have to be who you are. That's the most important thing. And tell the student who you are. And try to find, your level of a relationship that's healthy for you. That's healthy for you, that you feel works. I don't think there's a specific answer to that one. In general, you're going to have to sort of find out that for yourself.
Well, if you put up goals for your students, a goal, I want you to be brilliant, whatever.
Oh.
but
Yeah,
an
yeah.
imaginary
Sure.
goal that you can put.
Yeah.
But, and then they could feel a sort of responsibility.
Yeah.
into that.
On the other hand, it's pretty hard to grasp that concept when you're new.
Of course,
Yeah.
but then you have goals below that.
True.
Coming to that.
True. Sure. That's evolving. Yeah. So that's what I wrote here, let the student grow and transfer responsibility. I try to do that in a way. I'm sure you would work the same way, that the first time you sort of more spoon feed your student and say, do this and look into that and do that. But after a while, I want to sort of transfer that responsibility so that I am behind. The student should drive the subject. He or she should know more than I do. They're spending full time on something. They should become the expert. Which also means be less controlling. Yeah, I think the most important thing is to try to learn. I mean, everybody I think knows here that we have very preciously little time to do our own work. At least I do. When do you have time to actually sit down for a week and go through a stack of papers or a book that you want to read? Well, it just doesn't happen because you're in meetings every time. But the best way to learn is from your students. If you're active in their research work, you learn a lot. That's how I grow. And remember, it's your students. It's your student thesis, not yours. But on the other hand, you're going to have to help them. And again, where's the limit? Where's the limit? Yes.
Do you ever talk to your students, your PhD students, that this is kind of a personal development process?
I'm not sure I'm using that word, but yes. I mean, they have to evolve.
Yeah.
It's a personal. They evolve and they expand their own knowledge. So it's important that they create their own knowledge, rather than I giving them knowledge. I mean, I can't give anybody knowledge. They're going to have to evolve their own. And it takes time.
Before I became a PhD student, I had a colleague that had just completed her PhD, and she said, this has been the most fantastic personal development for me as a person, as well as writing and carrying out all the research.
You would hope so. You would hope so.
And that sort of talked to me in a way that I also myself experienced, and I kind of reflected on when I was in situations where I felt very small and knew nothing about anything, sitting in groups, for example, discussing.
Sure. I think it's important to tell them that it takes time. It's not done overnight. That's why the PhD is 4 years. It takes 4 years at least to grow.
I wonder, I think it's different ways of learning for different persons.
Yes.
Some persons like to read, and some persons like to do, and some to listen.
Yeah.
And to discuss.
Yeah.
And to evaluate what kind of person is this.
Yeah.
To get the way to reach him or her.
They are different. I think a lot of the new knowledge is actually created not by your desk, but in dialogue. On a whiteboard. You stand there and you talk. I don't understand this. How does it work? And you scribble. That's when you learn. I learned the most, at least. And I think you need to have that anyway. And you can read as many books as you want to, but if you want to create something new, that's where it's going to have to happen. Yeah. All right. Remember this. I feel sometimes that when I read the rules and regulations of a university, that there's a lot of pressure on the supervisor has to do this, the supervisor has to do that. If something goes wrong, it's always the supervisor's fault. That's unfortunately the feeling I get when I read about this. And in some sense, you can say that, well, supervisors are middle management. We get shit from above and from below and from everywhere. And that's a little bit sad, I think. But I think it's important to also know that PhD students, they do have responsibilities. They are responsible for their studies, for their evolution, if you like, and creating their knowledge. And you can put pressure on them. You're the one that's going to have to learn something. It's their responsibility. And we tend to forget sometimes. Doesn't mean that you should be nasty or anything, but they do. They do have parts of this too. I think it's coffee time.